The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've now learned that a Texas nurse who contracted Ebola during her time treating the victim of Ebola, Thomas Duncan, in Texas, has now been released from Emory University Hospital in Atlanta after being found free of the virus, according to the hospital. This is Amber Vinson, who was one of the two nurses at the Dallas hospital who treated Thomas Eric Duncan, who ultimately died of Ebola on October 8th, was the first patient diagnosed in the United States. She was admitted to Emory's hospital for treatment on October 15th. The other nurse, Nina Pham, also was declared virus-free last week and left the Maryland hospital where she had been treated. Lewis, increasingly, we are getting more and more data that confirms that the panic that is seems to be the normal standard operating procedure on corporate media is completely overblown. We see here that we had 2 cases. Fortunately, neither of those led to people dying. And now we hopefully, at least it seems, that we have kind of closed the circle on Thomas Eric Duncan's case.
It seems we have. Don't let that. That's not going to stop the media from continuing in panic mode. I was watching CNN last night, and it was all about the Northeast now. Yes, it seems like, and I love to hear this, living in Austin, that the Dallas portion of this seems to be coming to an end.
Yeah, and you're right, because meanwhile, Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey insists that he was on the right side of both science and public opinion when he enforced a mandatory quarantine on a nurse who came back from treating patients in West Africa in spite of having absolutely no symptoms. Of course, we reported yesterday that the nurse's mandatory quarantine was eased and she was allowed to kind of self-quarantine at home as opposed to at this tent, essentially, which was determined to be the place where she had to quarantine. Chris Christie was interviewed by Matt Lauer on the Today Show, and he said that it just absolutely made sense what he did. It was the right move to quarantine mandatorily Casey Hickox. And what we now know, Lewis, is that Texas seems to have been stopped. We have a New York City doctor who has Ebola, who is at Bellevue, who did, in spite of being accused of irresponsibility, did everything that Doctors Without Borders said that he should do, which is check his temperature twice a day, be mindful of symptoms, stay within 4 hours of a hospital with isolation facilities at all times. He did all of those things, and as soon as he had the fever, he reported to that hospital within 2 hours, and hopefully, Lewis, I understand that we're only, 4 or so days in to when his symptoms started, but hopefully this is not going to spread beyond this one case in New York either, and the panic has to stop. This is being used, as we see corporate media do all the time, this is being used to create panic and fear when it is not the rational reaction.
But the point, of course, of creating panic and fear, at least from the point of view of corporate media, is that it gets you viewers, right? It increases ratings. And so it seems to work well for them.
Yeah, that's a part of it, but I have honestly been questioning this myself the last few days because I understand that fear drives viewers, and just very calmly and soberly reporting what's happening with Ebola the way we saw BBC do in the UK, it doesn't excite people or make people have to stand around the TV at their workplace to see what exactly is going on. So I get the ratings angle, but I also feel like there has to be something else, something more inherent to our culture that leads to the immediate jumping to this fear-mongering that we see. I don't know exactly what it is, but I feel like there's something more to it.
It could just be that we are a culture of fear. Maybe that's just our natural reaction, and it's reflected in the media.
Some not really fear-based reporting, but I guess just kind of odd and quirky, came from our local New York news station called New York One. After Ebola came to New York City, Dr. Spencer at Bellevue, now being treated for Ebola, New York One's Errol Lewis had a pretty sound and very simple piece of advice, which outlined actually in its simplicity some of the irrationality in the fear-mongering coverage. Here's what he had to say.
Wondering about methods of transmission, and they're remarkably similar in a way. I mean, blood, mucus, feces, semen, you have to come in intimate contact with it while the person is infected. Now, if you came across some strange mucus or feces or something out there on the subway, the street, or anywhere else, don't eat it. Don't let it get into your body. Don't touch it. And I think
it sounds dumb, right? Don't eat or touch or pick up any mucus or feces that you see on the street. But it actually outlines the fact that it is not that easy to catch Ebola. Where we see widespread contagion in Guinea and Sierra Leone and in Liberia, we see people that are completely disregarding all precautions whatsoever when it comes to handling people that have or have died from Ebola. We see the insistence on burial rituals that expose individuals to open sores and the bodily fluids of those who have died from Ebola. But when we really think about this, in spite of hypothetical scenarios where, Ebola might be able to live on a surface for X number of days in the exact right temperature and other conditions, the reality here is that we have proof that it is not that easy to catch Ebola in societies where hand washing is a regular thing. And when we're aware of this, as Texas and New York so far, knock on wood, have proven.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that hard to get it, but I mean, when you look at Africa, you're right. There's just a total lack of education, a lack of understanding.
Not that easy to get it, I think you meant to say.
Right. Sorry, not that easy to get it.
Yikes.
But in a place where, in the places that we're talking about in Africa, it's a disaster because people just don't understand what's happening, and some are in just complete denial about it.
Yeah, and we've talked about the health workers that were killed when they tried to go over and educate people about Ebola. This is not about pretending that there's no risk. This is not about pretending that we live in some paradise where there is no transmission of dangerous diseases. We just have to remember what we're dealing with. We have to remember that it hasn't been spreading in the U.S. now that we are weeks and weeks after a case entered the United States. And so many people are going to die from the flu this season, Lewis. Thousands, tens of thousands of people will be dying from the flu. We don't hear the panic, partly because it is less contagious, partly because a much smaller percentage of those who have the flu will die. But we still have people who choose not to vaccinate, in spite of the fact that the vaccination would prevent so many of those deaths that are completely predictable, mind you.
We do, but we know about the flu. And we hear about it every year, and people see other people get the flu and they don't die. But, people fear the unknown, and Ebola kind of fits into that category.
We've been talking a lot about the desperate efforts from the right to try to prevent people from voting because they recognize that they're really having a problem with the demographic and ideological shifts that are taking place in this country. And the right touts voter ID requirements as something that simply needs to be demanded of everybody to prevent so-called voter fraud. Now remember, the type of voter fraud that the right claims to want to prevent by passing these laws basically doesn't exist. Do not forget this, ladies and gentlemen. Whenever someone talks about this, remember that there have been almost no cases of these types of voter fraud in the last couple of decades. These are people showing up to vote and claiming to be somebody else. So I show up at my neighbor's polling place. Well, that would be my place. At my across town neighbor's polling place and say, I'm Joe Schmo and I'm here to vote. And I vote for Joe Schmo, even though I'm really David Pakman. And the other one is showing up and voting multiple times at your own polling place, which is just absurd. Obviously, you're checked off when you vote, and there's no reason to think that would happen. And it isn't happening. So this is Republicans looking for a solution to a problem that does not exist. However, there's a whole other reason that we should be really concerned about these voter ID requirements. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that the voter IDs are not really free. You hear from the right that this is not a poll tax because the ID itself is free, and that's true. However, there is a study that was done in Texas which found, and this is in a really great article in The Atlantic by Peter Beinart, that Texans who earned less than $20,000 per year were more than 10 times more likely to lack the proper identification required to vote, okay? So there's a study called Accepted Photo Identification and Different Subgroups in the Eligible Voter Population. And to get one of these free IDs, the study found you need another form of identification. For most people, this is a birth certificate. The birth certificate, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, costs between $8 and $25 to obtain if you don't have it. Now, if you've moved, if you have a situation where you just don't have these family records, it's very, very possible that you need to get your birth certificate in order to get a so-called free voter ID. That's $8 to $25. In addition, married women often need to present a marriage license proving that they are originally the person whose name is shown in the birth certificate, because their new last name may not match the birth certificate since they are now married. Those cost between $8 and $20. This is the key piece of data. This is amazing, Lewis. Back in the civil rights era, poll taxes were outlawed. At the time, the poll taxes would have been $10.64 in today's dollars. So the poll tax back then would be $10.64 today. We're talking about a poll tax here, an ID cost that is between $8 and $45. This, Lewis, is a poll tax. This is not a free ID. And this is yet another way to keep likely Democratic voters from poor areas, from minority areas, from getting the IDs required to vote. And they cost money. It is not free.
And most of the Republicans behind this don't really care about voter fraud. They realize that's a non-issue.
Do they know, Lewis, that you would need to orchestrate something of such a scale to actually flip an election with those techniques that it would be impossible to keep it quiet?
And even when you ask them, they admit that countrywide, every election cycle, there's something like 10 cases of voter fraud. And it's obviously it's completely negligible.
Add to this the fact that the study found that nearly 500,000 people without access to a car are more than 10 miles from the nearest office that regularly issues IDs. You have to add to the $8 to $45 cost for the documents you need, transportation. This is a pretty expensive free ID, isn't it, Lewis?
Very expensive. This is totally despicable, and it's embarrassing that this is happening.
Over the weekend, Drudge Report, conservative news aggregator Drudge Report, had a huge headline, coldest year on record. Of course, it's meant to imply that the global warming component of climate change is just not real. Now, even if it were true, we've only observed temperature over a relatively small amount of historical time, and it would be kind of worthless to even say, even if it was true that this year was really cold, it wouldn't really tell us much about broader climate change. But the funniest part is that it was a straight up lie. Over the weekend, the right went absolutely nuts, fetishizing and pleasing themselves over this so-called report that this was the coldest year on record, when we actually go to the scientists at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the NOAA, also known as NOAA. They indicated there's a very good chance that 2014 could be the warmest year on record. Sometimes, Lewis, slight distortions of the facts from the right, sometimes flat out stating the opposite in spite of all the evidence telling you that you're wrong. Quote, if we continue a consistent departure from average for the rest of 2014, we will edge out 2010 as the warmest year on record. That's an actual climatologist, ladies and gentlemen. It is true that parts of the eastern U.S. have been somewhat cold, relatively cold. We had a freezing cold winter. But if you look at the global picture, the east coast of the United States does not a global pattern make. And it just seems that the right doesn't care at this point.
It's a shame that so many people are listening to conservative pundits and energy company lobbyists when it comes to these issues. It's like people reading mommy blogs and looking at Facebook pages when they're considering vaccinating their kids. I mean, why don't you just consult the experts on this? It's pretty much unanimous across the board that things are getting warmer.
And not only that, Lewis, listen to this double standard. Sometimes we hear from the right, when they accept evidence that the earth is warming, that it doesn't matter, or that we don't really need to worry about that. And at the same time, when they think they have data saying that it's cold, all of a sudden The temperature matters big time, Lewis. Temperature matters hugely. We should be paying very close attention. And by the way, it's getting colder. Does it matter or not? Tell us and decide, and then let's go forward. What a flip-flopping double standard.
It is a pretty obvious double standard, yeah. But, we're going to have to deal with this one way or another when usually we just don't deal with things until they get so bad that we have no choice.
Follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. When conservatives unskew liberally biased numbers, they can prove some pretty amazing facts. For example, did you know that President Obama has driven unemployment up to 50%? I bet you're not hearing that on liberally biased media. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Addison Nelson. And this is great news for Addison because Addison is going to, on today's bonus show, see what the 2015 Patriot Mail calendar looks like. I have the calendar, Lewis, and I will be showing it on screen during today's bonus show. So join Addison Nelson as a member, get the bonus show and all of the other great member benefits by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Gas prices. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you've noticed, but gas prices are the lowest they have been since December of 2010. The average price right now is $3.08 per gallon. The right-wingers were consumed with this in 2009, in 2010, in 2011. Mitt Romney even ran on blaming President Obama for the high gas prices during his 2012 election campaign. And gas prices are expected to continue to decline as we see increasing oil production in the U.S. and abroad. Again, I don't actually think that the president is unilaterally responsible for this in any way, but President Obama was on the receiving end of very specific criticism, even from his opponent, Mitt Romney, that he was responsible for the gas prices being high back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. Silence. Now that gas prices are at new lows, silence. Not a single right-winger. Where's Mitt Romney? Where are any of these guys saying, you know what? If President Obama was responsible for them being high, we've got to give him credit for them being low. I'm not hearing it.
It seems like if we're not hearing anything from them on this, then there's no possible way to put a bad spin on this to make President Obama look bad. So you just gotta keep quiet, I guess.
We've talked about all of the bad things that have happened under President Obama. TPP, trying to get that through, not closing Guantanamo Bay, kind of furthering of this plutocratic status quo, not really going after the banksters on Wall Street, NSA and surveillance. We've talked about all that. But for a second, think about all of the obstructionism, the blatant obstructionism from Republicans during President Obama's presidency. And in spite of all that, we have unemployment lower than Mitt Romney promised he would have it at by the end of his first term. We have gas prices at 4-year lows. We have the stock market at near record highs. We're mostly out of two wars, although we keep getting drawn back into these engagements in the Middle East, which of course we are not in favor of, but understand the context of which, within which President Obama is operating. It's actually amazing that President Obama has even been able to do this much stuff.
He has been able to accomplish some things, yes, but I think if we looked at the whole picture, I think it would probably be even with, positive things that he's done or tried to do, along with bad things that have just furthered corporate interests.
There's no question that we have been strong critics of the Obama administration, and it's funny because even mentioning that he did something positive brings allegations that we're just Obamatons, and that could not be further from the truth. If you've paid any attention to this program, I don't know how you could possibly think that. Let's talk about private prisons. We talk often about how private prisons are a problem, but at the same time, they represent a pretty small portion of total prisons. I think something only like 8 to 10% of the national prison population is in a private prison. However, we figured out one area where we really have a problem with private prisons. On any given day, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, keeps at least 34,000 immigrants locked up while they wait for their cases to be heard in immigration court. Many of these detainees are incarcerated not because they're dangerous, not because they're likely to skip their court dates, but because Congress has set an arbitrary quota that must be met by ICE. And this is written directly into federal law. 34,000 detention beds must be maintained. And this is exactly the type of issue that we should be critical of both Congress and the private prison industry for. The way private prisons often work is they agree to take a prison population. They agree to replace sometimes a public prison, but often they have these minimum occupancy requirements or guarantees that are built into their contract, where the government says, you can run this prison and we will guarantee to keep it 98% full at all times. Or if we don't, we still have to pay you as if it were 98% full. And the detention of immigrants is becoming a very, very popular way, Lewis, to keep these numbers up, the occupancy numbers, by detaining these immigrants for significant periods of time. Often these are individuals who don't end up being charged with any crimes and are eventually released. These are not all people who are going to be deported. And it is absolute prison industrial complex corruption. This is a specific area where the private prison industry is to blame, because more than half of these mandatory beds are in private prisons. So private prisons, small percentage of the total prison population, represent half of these mandatory immigrant detentions.
And I mean, can we really blame those private companies, or do we blame the politicians for letting those private companies and lobbyists coerce them into insane legislation like this with quotas and mandatory, a mandatory number of people that you should have incarcerated, and that we're paying them? I understand from a state's point of view that times are tough. You needed to free up some funds, and that maybe this was a way out of some of that. But we went about it in the completely wrong way.
There are serious questions about the legality of a congressional mandate that requires the detention of a certain number of people, period, separate from, well, how many people have actually been suspected of breaking laws that would get them incarcerated. That's not part of the mandate. The mandate is just, you must maintain this quota. The incarceration problem in this country is so serious that we are essentially in a neck-and-neck battle with North Korea for the country that incarcerates most people per capita. It's pathetically embarrassing.
It is pretty embarrassing. Hopefully, with the legalization of marijuana countrywide, we can reduce our numbers a little bit.
Next, I will speak to a woman who claims to be the former lover of Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin of former President John F. Kennedy. This is going to be interesting. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Judyth Vary Baker, who is the author of the new book, David Ferrie, Mafia Pilot, Participant in Anti-Castro Bioweapon Plot, and as well as a friend of Lee Harvey Oswald and key to the JFK assassination. Judyth Vary Baker claims to be the former lover of Kennedy assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. This is such an incredible story, Miss Baker. I'm thrilled to have you on. Let's start at the beginning. How did you meet Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, Lee was sent briefly. He was sent when I arrived in New Orleans, and I was only 19. I arrived early for an assignment that turned out to be a CIA-sponsored project to kill Castro. I was very anti-Castro, but I had been trained to handle SV40 monkey virus and other dangerous components of cancer in cancer research, and I was alone, and he was sent to protect me and make sure I would be safe until the doctors returned. They were in South America when I came.
So let's start there, because there's a lot there, as my audience can obviously tell, to
Yes.
take a look at. So you were working for the CIA at the time?
Well, I didn't know it, of course. They only tell you what they have to tell you. But eventually, of course, I did understand because Lee and I developed a relationship that turned into a love affair. And I can assure you that Lee Oswald was framed and did not kill Kennedy. I mean, this is an obsolete thing the Warren Commission has put together, but
let's not skip ahead though. Let's not skip ahead. Let's go piece by piece. I don't want my audience to miss a second of this. So what was the project that you were working on with regard to Castro?
All right. We now know the CIA and Mafia worked together to try to kill Castro. They had tried everything. Now, this was a covert attempt to use cancer because Fidel Castro smoked cigars. And we knew that if we could get lung cancer cells injected into him of a certain kind that they've been working on, that he would probably die from it.
So this is a sort of bioweapon, correct?
Yes, and that was 50 years ago. Imagine what we have today.
Now, I'm curious, why would the CIA at that time need to develop something as complex as injecting lung cancer cells when they already had so many poisons that could have killed Castro?
Well, they had already tried that. Rita Lorenz, for example, they gave her poison pills. You hid them in cold cream and they dissolved. Other people would be connected to that, but he was getting like DPT shots and things, and nobody could ever trace, if it was done correctly, that he was really getting cancer cells instead.
So you meet Lee Harvey Oswald, and he reveals to you he's been sent to protect you. Talk about that. What was he sent to protect you from?
Well, from Castro spies. The whole project was in New Orleans, and that's a point. That's a point of entry. And many Cubans were coming in who knew we didn't know whether they were spies or not, because they were also training insurgents there to try and reinvade Cuba. And all that's in the book. And by the way, it's all documented. I have witnesses also as to my relationship that are on film and tape about the fact that we had a relationship.
Well, let's go step by step again, not to get too far ahead of ourselves.
Sure.
Here's just an innocent question that I hope you have the answer to. If you didn't even know you were working for the CIA, how would it be that you needed to be protected from foreign elements that knew you were working for the CIA?
That's an excellent question. Well, even though I didn't, we had there was penetration into CIA from a lot of Cubans because CIA was working with them, and to determine who was on Castro's side was not that easy.
Okay.
So there,
how did your relationship?
Doctors even.
How did your relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald develop?
Well, it's through a series of circumstances. Basically, we both had very unhappy marriages. My former husband, he married me one day, and the next day he was gone. I mean, he didn't tell me where he even went for weeks at a time. And it really hurt my feelings. And as for Lee, he had to marry his wife when he was in the USSR so he wouldn't get deported. So it wasn't like a marriage made in heaven.
And who publicly would know about your relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, we have Anna Lewis and others. We have the Charles Thomas family. We have Mac McCullough. These are witnesses who have gone on tape and film verifying that they saw me with Lee and that, kissing me and things,
Well, but I want to stay, because this is such a big issue, right? Yes. I want to stay as close to the facts as I know them, and then you can correct me where I'm wrong. Anna Lewis, who's the former wife of David Lewis, has confirmed that she saw you on a couple of dates with Lee Harvey Oswald. And but hold on, let me get the question out. Yeah. You'll have plenty of time to respond. And that you did both work together. But Anna Lewis has not stated anything in terms of any kind of a romantic relationship. It's period.
That's not correct. In her film that's on YouTube, it says I was his mistress. Now, I think that pretty much confirms the relationship.
Anna Lewis has claimed that you said you were his...
She has asserted, sir.
She has asserted that that was your claim, though. She had no...
Sir, in a way, it's not a claim. Lee and I, we have a complete relationship that you can establish right from at least as early as May 9th, when we were both hired by a tiny company the same day. 1 week later, we were moved together, and it's all in the records, official records.
With all due respect, though, being hired by the same company does not prove that there's any kind of affair.
I'm saying we can establish the relationship even by our check stubs, which I kept all 50 years now. And I
But
did that.
doesn't that only prove that you were both being paid by the same company? Let me just give you an example.
Well,
Ms. Baker, my objective is to present the audience with the data. My audience knows that my check stub and my producers come from the same small company. That would not, of course, prove that I'm in any kind of relationship with my producer, right?
But were you hired the same day? And when if he got fired, would you be fired the same day?
I don't know. I guess we'd have to wait and see if that happens.
Well,
but of course, that's
I have
speculative.
those kind of records.
So let's go to the moment of the assassination, right? Talk to us about that day. What was that like?
Well, I had been sent out of the project because I had been kicked out because I had ethical objections to using prisoners who were volunteers, and they were going to be injected with this, and if it worked, it would kill them. And because I objected, they sent me back to Florida. It really saved my life. But Lee and I stayed in contact. I talked to him via phone, and we have some kinds of records to help substantiate that.
What kind of records?
Well, the Warren Commission noticed that a woman with no accent called the Texas School Book Depository and asked for the janitor. Now, Lee was not a janitor. He was a clerk there. But that was the way that I contacted him. The first two initials of my name are Judyth Ann. And that's what I used. And the name of janitor is very rare. I'm trying to find somebody else in working position. So he knew it was me and called me back. And we have a lot of other material that I have inside information that now has been substantiated. For example, I told people in 1999 that Lee had saved Kennedy's life. He believed he did. And now we have Abraham Bolden that came out and said that's true. Okay. Lee Oswald is the one who called the FBI in Chicago and saved Kennedy's life.
Well, no, listen, I mean, here's the thing, Ms. Baker. Do you see why, from the point of view of an audience, when you say all of this has been substantiated, but there is hold on, but you don't provide substantiation and such independent substantiation doesn't exist. But hold on, Ms. Baker, Ms. Baker.
I cannot provide for you the documents which I have in a 508-page book. The documents are there.
I understand that. I'm merely trying to have just a conversation with you, which is I would love it if you would give me your opinion as to whether you understand why people for decades have been so skeptical of your claims. Do you understand that? I haven't made these claims, sir, what you call claims, for decades. I spoke out for the first time in 1999 after a silence of 35 years. And that's over 3 decades, right?
No, sir, that's not over 3 decades. That's 1 year in 1999, and we are now in 2014. Okay, that's 15 years.
I apologize if my semantics were wrong, but over a period that spanned 3 different decades, a period that spanned 3 decades.
I have no more problems, sir, except with maybe somebody in New York, when I claim that I knew Lee Oswald and what we were working on. That's why in the last 2 years I haven't had opposition.
But that's not true, Ms. Baker, with all due respect. It's not true to say you've had no opposition. There are...
No, I have not had opposition, sir. I'm talking about in most of the interviews I've had. Yeah. The opposition is old. It comes from the same people all the way back to 1999 who never met me.
I'm sensing that you're getting very defensive, but I'm merely asking basic questions here.
And you haven't read the book, and you say I have. You're talking about that I don't have documentation.
All I'm saying, Ms. Baker, is that an assertion is not evidence that the assertion is true.
I have the book. The book is called Me and Lee, and the other book is David Vary, Mafia Pilot. You can get them from Trine Day Publishers, or you can go to Amazon.com. Okay. Read the reviews.
You know, Ms. Baker, I was really hoping to be able to have more of a ground level discussion about why these claims are so heavily contested. It's not
they are not heavily contested.
But that's the thing. We disagree about that, Ms. Baker. With all due respect, Ms. Baker.
That comes from one group only. People who have never met me. And one of them is led by a man whose book was canceled because of my book.
Did you ever meet John F. Kennedy?
What has that to do with what we're talking about? Have you?
What the reason it matters is you're saying anyone who hasn't met you can't reasonably criticize or know what is or is not true about your life. But you make claims about the assassination of Kennedy, a man whom you've never met.
These people attacked the book before it was even published, sir. Before they knew how to spell my name properly, they put it with an I. They were attacking me. They never met me, and they produced silly things like they said I only have one paycheck, or that I only knew Lee for 11 weeks. Things like that you can read are not true. And
Okay, but I've not said those things. I've not said those things.
No, you haven't, but you have said that I have a lot of opposition. Sir, I'm going to 31 cities. This is being financed by people who have read the book. They're from plane ticket to plane ticket, from hotel to hotel, and I'm reaching the people. I loved Lee Oswald with all my heart.
All right. Well, I hoped we could have a different sort of discussion. I apologize that it went in this direction, but I'll tell you what, I encourage the audience to do as you say, check out the book and see if it resonates with you and go from there. So I do thank you for being on, Ms. Baker. We've been speaking with Judyth Vary Baker.
I will always be honest with you and tell you exactly how I feel.
Thank you so much.
God bless.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Pat Robertson was responding to one of these viewer questions on his 700 Club program, and Pat Robertson claims now that as Christians, they have the power to raise the dead, but they're simply not using that power right now. Here's Pat Robertson.
Do we have the same power that it took to raise Jesus Christ from the dead? And if so, where is that in the Bible?
Well, he gave his disciples the authority to heal the sick, to raise the dead. I mean, that was part of our power. You see, ladies and gentlemen, God is almighty. He is almighty. And he gives us that power. And Jesus said, you say to the mountain, you speak to the dead person. He called on Lazarus. He said, Lazarus, come forth. And the dead man came up out of the grave. We have the same power. He's given it to us. It's in the Holy Spirit. But we need to be in touch with him. We need to behold him. We need to be submitted to him. And that power is there. We just aren't using it.
Pat Robertson might be the most immoral, insensitive person in the world, Lewis. We know that he claims to have faith-healing powers and to have used them sporadically. But in spite of having those powers, he chooses to do a TV show rather than to go to every single hospital and place where people are sick and heal them. Now he's even further saying that he could be raising the dead, Christians could be raising the dead, but they're just not using that power right now. Can you imagine anything more immoral, Lewis, than having these abilities and choosing not to use them?
I don't know what's going on with this guy. Does he actually believe this stuff, or does he just like sitting back in his chair knowing that everything he says people are just eating right up and making himself seem like some type of God?
I also love the shifting barometer of Christianity, because think about this. On the one hand, you have Christians who claim that faith healing exists and that raising the dead based on the word of Jesus exists. It's all a very positive thing. At the same time, though, you have a huge portion of Christianity that when individuals claim to be doing these things not based on the word of Jesus, it's sorcery, it's witchcraft, it's black magic, it's the paranormal, it's evil. How can it be, Lewis, that simply whether it's Jesus-based or not makes faith healing or raising the dead or any of this type of stuff go from evil black magic to just using the powers that Jesus endowed you with?
Because Jesus is the way. Jesus is the good guy. Everything else is bad.
Is it that simple?
I think it really is. Yeah, it's pretty much that simple.
If Pat Robertson really had this ability, it would be immoral for him not to spend every day in a hospital healing everybody in there. It's sickening that he's choosing not to do that, Lewis. Or maybe it's just not really a power that he has. I know that that's far-fetched, but maybe that's the reality. We have huge news. Speaking of, we've been talking a lot about Ebola. We have a different virus that I think has passed through the system, and that is of the program Honey Boo Boo on the Learning Channel. This is a terrible, terrible show. This is the stuff that rots your brain. And TLC has officially canceled Here Comes Honey Boo Boo due to rumors that the family's matriarch, Mama June Summers, was dating a convicted child molester. This comes as a surprise to absolutely no one. TMZ released a photo of Mama June and recently released convict Mark McDaniel in a hotel room together, along with reports that the two of them had resumed a relationship that began and ended 10 years ago. McDaniel was convicted of aggravated child molestation in specifically forcing oral sex on an 8-year-old child relative of this woman, who apparently went back to him after his 10-year prison sentence that started in 2004. This show, Lewis, is a representation of so much of what's wrong with American society and of so much of what's wrong with American television. I am so glad that this program is done. After this all happened, Mama June's daughter, Anna, says she was the victim of Mark McDaniel, a boyfriend of June's who Shannon believes is still in the picture. She came forward to confirm that indeed her mother's boyfriend molested her when she was a kid. This is so insanely heinous, and I think we can all be glad that the program is off the air. It was a black mark on this country. It was a black mark on television. We should not be glorifying in any way this type of thing. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it's total crap and filth. And to think that TLC used to be a channel with educational programming pretty much 24/7. We've regressed. We've totally regressed in this department.
We have, absolutely. This is a program I've seen maybe 10 minutes of. You know, I want to know what it is that's out there. So all of these shows, I try to just see what it is, because I don't want to, if it comes up in conversation on the show or in whatever context, I want to have some sense of what we're dealing with. And when I saw this program, I was absolutely disgusted. And we can all be glad, Lewis, that the show is now gone. We have a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. We have gotten some great feedback from progressives about yesterday's criticism of Reza Aslan. Yesterday we said Reza Aslan's rhetoric is not that different from that of many right-wing religious apologists. Some of the claims he's making are flat out false, and we need to be skeptical of some of what Reza Aslan has been touting. And I was thrilled, Lewis, that in spite of some negative comments from our progressive audience, the response was overwhelmingly positive. I have 3 voicemails to play for you about this exact topic. Take a listen.
Hey, David, this is Derek. I just want to thank you for your Reza Aslan piece. It's really refreshing to hear someone who's actually criticizing the guy, because on the Majority Report, Michael Brooks, you probably know him, had this like half an hour long piece where he just says atheists don't get it and just never criticizing anything that Reza says. Yeah, well, I don't know anything about that piece. I'd have to see it. I wouldn't be able to critique it without seeing it, but thank you for the praise. Here's another voicemail on the same topic.
Hi, this is John. I just called to compliment you on your fervent critique of Reza Aslan. As bright as that guy is, he just doesn't seem to get atheism, and you seem to put it very well, and it was a great critique. Thanks, guys.
Thanks very much. Using the word fervent, of course, invented by Lewis, a combination of feverish and fervent. Although, to be honest, I appreciate the use of the term, but I don't think that my critique was actually fervent, feverish, or fervent. I thought that it was simply fact-based and looked at the data that we had. And of course, the Eggman. Haven't heard from the Eggman for a little while, weighing in on this as well.
Hey guys, Lewis called Reza Aslan a Muslim extremist. I just want to say thank you so much for stating that, Lewis.
Okay, now let's be clear. Lewis didn't call him a Muslim extremist. He said that some of what he was saying was similar to what religious extremists say. So praise from the Eggman for something Lewis didn't exactly say, but let's continue and hear the rest of this.
David, thank you for your courage, for calling out this scumbag, terrorist, apologist. Finally, somebody is saying what a scum he is. His book about Jesus and that Christian stuff, I hated it. He is so condescending. I knew this was going to come out about him. I knew it all along. Thank you.
All right, so I don't really agree at all with the Eggman's characterization. We didn't say that Reza Aslan was scum. We didn't say that he was a terror apologist. We said only what we actually said in the clip yesterday, but very, very glad to receive so much positive critique and praise for that segment. On today's bonus show, thieves targeting keyless cars, the 10 most conservative and liberal cities in the U.S., some of them may surprise you, and a Silicon Valley company trying to pay people $1.21 per hour, $1.21 per hour. All of that and more on today's bonus show, including the big reveal of the 2015 Patriot Mail Calendar, soon to be available. Don't miss it. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up for membership and get instant access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.